This is a recording of the 40 Years of Steve Jackson Games panel from virtual Gen Con 2020. Steve Jackson and Phil Reed were the featured speakers.
So, our subject is 40 years of SJ Games, and that's a bunch. As far as I know, we are the oldest game company still under original management. Now, it's customary when you're elderly to offer theories about your longevity. So why are we still around when so many really great companies are not? First point is that some of the great companies are still around. Just management has changed. Chaosium is an example of a classic company that has different supervision now, but is still releasing products that would make Greg Stafford proud. One reason we're still here is dumb luck. Sometimes a person gets hit by a truck. Sometimes a company gets hit by the equivalent of a truck. Game Designers Workshop, really classic company, was hit by about 3 trucks at once, and Lauren Wiseman used to say they could have survived any 2, but not all 3. There was a lawsuit with TSR. There was the bad sales of the Gulf War Fact Book and the CCG boom in which they did not participate. All had something to do with their running out of money and giving up. But you have to remember, again, getting back to the first point, Mark Miller is still out there shepherding Traveler along. So we've still got Traveler. Another reason we're still here is that nobody has made me an unreasonable buyout offer. I can think of some companies that are not here now because their owners were offered too darn much money and they intelligently took it. I have not had that experience. And no, I'm not naming names. Getting more serious, a big reason that we're still here is we've always had at least one solid evergreen title. The first one was Car Wars. By the time Car Wars finally slacked off, there was Gurps. Now there's Munchkin and Zombie Dice, and there has almost always been Illuminati. Another reason that we have hung on is that while a couple of times we have had to do big layoffs, we don't make an annual, habit process. We don't do it every year the way some companies seem to. We do our best to be loyal. If we have someone who is a good fit for the company but not a good fit for their task, we try to move them around. And when it became clear that COVID-19 was a real thing, we chose not to furlough people. We reinvented ourselves as much as possible, and it turns out to be very possible as a work-from-home company. Another reason that we have been long-lived is that we have been cautious or even slow to jump on bandwagons. That can make us late to the party. For instance, we were very slow to release our first CCG. It was good when it came out, but we were slow with it. But we had very little investment in D20, for instance, and none at all in POGs. Remember POGs? We have a passion for quality. We find that people are a better fit if they're nuts about quality. We try to earn your loyalty by producing the very best things we can. It seems to have worked because here you are. No POGs. Quit saying that. I see the comment that POGs are not a game in the traditional sense. That's completely true, but a lot of game companies were all over it when they came out. Okay, another reason to continue, diversification. The first reason for that is just my own general gamer geekiness, desire to do everything. But it means that our portfolio is widely diversified. Card games, board war game, RPGs, including one live RPG, trading card games, miniatures rules, and some things that absolutely cannot be classified. A thing that I think we have done right is supporting retailers and conventions, because that's how you folks meet each other and encounter new games. In the past few months, that has become very, very hard. It was a black swan event. We hadn't planned for it. We think that if the hobby as a whole weathers this, then we will weather it. But it has been a bad year. We try to keep up with new tech when it supports the old school style. We now offer most of our role-playing line in PDFs. We're doing our best to learn about virtual tabletops. We have this Discord server. Once we made the decision to try Kickstarter, and we were slow into Kickstarter, but once we moved, we have made very good use of it. That's largely down to Phil, and I hope he can address it when he talks. But we are not the first to jump on technological bandwagon. Likewise, with caution, we are very, very cautious with cash. Maybe too cautious, but that is way better than not cautious enough. A comparison I made is that if you spend hard on new ideas all at once, you're buying a die roll. And one side of that die roll is big success, but the die can also come up a critical failure. Critical failures can kill you. Our small size could be an advantage if we were trying to be nimble, but since we are cautious, that kind of cancel. But our small size means that when we do finally decide to do something, we can move a lot of our resources behind it quickly. When we finally change footing, we can change footing fast.
Steve, I'd like to touch on that for a moment, because a recent example of us being nimble, I would say the Hexagram series.
Right.
Because Kickstarter announced they were going to do their Zine Quest event. We discussed it and said, let's do it. And I think that came together very well and has actually now turned into an entire subline for the fantasy trip.
Yes, that's correct. Now, I did not feel we were taking a big risk on that one. The worst that could have happened was that it would have done okay on the first issue. It would have made our money back. When people were so enthusiastic about it, yes, we were able to pivot, there is no such word, and put a lot behind it. And yeah, we have issue 5 up for Kickstart support now. Some of issue 6 is already ready. We'll keep going as long as you folks like it.
And I assume pivel is a nimble pivot?
Yeah, okay, so it is a word. A pivel. We pivoted. That was really pretty much the end of my opening remarks. Phil, unless you have anything more to add right now.
I do not. I would just like to answer questions as they come in. I think that's the best use of our time this afternoon.
Okay. Yeah, I figure you folks are here to ask questions and we're here to answer them. And do not feel that you have to stick to the 40 years theme. We're here. Ask questions. Fire away.
All right, I'll go ahead and start pulling questions out of the queue then. Presto Jeff asks, what are you most proud of?
Wow. I think the answer to that on the whole might be 40 years of pretty good stuff. We have done a lot of games. We've given people a lot of good memories. We're directly and indirectly employing a lot of people, most of them in the geekdom that they love. And that makes me proud.
Phil, do you want to weigh in on that too?
I think being personally involved in about half of those 40 years makes me proud. That's a long time to work with a single company.
And you have done just about everything in the company at one time or another.
Including packing in the warehouse and hurting myself, so I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's a cottage industry, and one rule of cottage industry is everybody in the cottage works. Okay, next question.
Captain Zippo asks, is the new Fantasy Trip material compatible with the original Fantasy Trip from Metagaming? I still have all my original TFT games.
The TLDR answer is no. The longer answer is some things have changed. You're going to have to house rule. There are going to be places, if for the rule set you're only using the old in the labyrinth, for instance, the character point system is completely different. There are places where whole paragraphs are unchanged, but there are also places where I decided to do things differently. So my long answer is don't feel that you have to charge out and buy the new edition rule set right away, especially if you've got to feed the kids. But at some point, it's better than the old one.
Don Del Grande asks, will the Autoduo universe be any different in the new Car Wars than in the original?
Phil, you want to take that? You were the shepherd for Car Wars.
I would say right now the most important part of Car Wars is the actual mechanics of the game. We've not dug deep into the universe because we want to get the game into everybody's hands and let you have a lot of fun playing that. And then we will take a look and see how much more support Car Wars is going to get. That will all depend on the demand. And it's hard to judge that at this time.
Yeah, if you folks end up telling us you want a lot of lore, we can give you a lot of lore. And it won't all be a rehash of what has come before. We've had some ideas for things that could be different in a rebooted universe. There will still have been a grain blight. There will still be dueling on the abandoned highways, or all chaos on the abandoned highways, and formal dueling in the cities. But there could be a lot of different stuff. It's going to be up to demand. Tell us you want lore, we can give you lore.
All right, next question. Proteus asks, what's a release from the past 40 years of which you're particularly proud? What would you most like to see happen over the next 40 years?
That's two questions. A giant safe comes from the ceiling and gets Proteus. What's a release of which you're particularly proud? Good. You didn't ask what's my favorite. I hate that. One of which I'm particularly proud is Illuminati, because that was the one that broke the most ground in terms of system design. And what would I most like to see happen over the next 40 years? And don't anybody else sneak in extra questions like that. Gee, what would I'd most like to be around at the end of the next 40 years to do this again. I don't think that's likely. What would I like to see happen? I'd like to see the company still be alive and healthy and not too freaking big and producing cool, slightly subversive games.
All right, next question. Gallium Entomond asks, given the genre, fantasy-flavored card game, why was there such a delay in getting Munchkin into a CCG format?
Short answer is we spent a lot of time testing it because we weren't just trying to piggyback on the name. We wanted to make it a really good game. It is a really good game. It didn't see the success that it deserved. Phil, anything to add to that?
I would say the delay definitely in getting it done right, but also just in gearing up to do it. When we tackled that, it had been over 20 years since the company had last touched CCG, and it's a completely different format. So a lot of us just had to learn new things. Fortunately, we have a lot of friends in the industry who are always willing to help, but it still took time to get up to speed and do it right.
You raise a good point there. I should add that to my mental list of reasons we're not dead yet. We have friends in the industry, and we always try to make friends in the industry. We do our best to share knowledge with our competitors, because our competitors are not really our competitors. They are our allies in keeping this hobby alive against all of the things that really compete for your time.
That is one of my favorite parts of the industry, is how easy it is for me to contact people I know at other companies and share information. It allows us to find new ways to print things, gives us advance warning when a distributor or retailer may be having problems. It's just generally a very friendly and still relatively small industry.
Oh, I see a point that was just thrown out, and I'm going to say something about it. Turkwan commented that family card games, should never have a collectible component. I agree. Munchkin was never intended to have any collectible aspect at all, the original Munchkin. Then we found out that the ephemera that we were producing, bookmarks and things like that, had become collectible. And we went, it happened. Okay, next question.
So Turcom asks, what's the likelihood of a miniature or 3D terrain line for the fantasy trip?
About 98%. We are working with the factory right now on miniatures in a 30 to 32 millimeter scale, but we haven't even settled in our own minds what the product will look like that they go into. It's just we know that making good minis is the hardest part, and once we decided to put a foot in that pool, the minis were the place to start, while we still go around with, okay, now what is the business plan for it?
I wonder if now's a good time for me to throw an image in the system.
Want to leak one of the pictures?
Yeah.
No.
There. That should be enough for the moment.
The left-hand image is not a photo of a painted mini. That mini doesn't exist yet. That color image is what a talented artist can do with something of the type of one of the other two images.
Yeah, what we have here on the right two images are the CAD sculpt, and on the left is artwork by Brandon Moore, who did the Fantasy Trip Legacy Edition cover and several of the other covers for the line.
Okay, next.
Proteus asks, what part of the last 40 years do you wish had gone differently for the company?
That's easy. I wish that the Secret Service nonsense had not occurred. That cost us half our staff, 5 years of growth. It was really damaging.
Presto Jeff asks, what's your biggest gaming regret?
Bad die rolls?
Phil, do you have one for that? I'm going to have to think about it for a minute.
Biggest gaming regret? Not keeping parts of my collection so that I end up rebuying it 20 and 30 years later.
I guess I'm going to say I wish that I had gone to more conventions, and I wish I could go more now.
Shadekeep asks, I've noticed a number of new playmats for titles like TFT and Car Wars. Are these proving to be a good product for you?
No, they're a terrible money loser, but we're stupid. No, that's not true. Yes, they are a good product. People like them, people comment on them and argue and tell us what to do next, and they keep buying them. That's a definition of a good product. The numbers are not so big that I'm retiring on them or anything, but they're definitely worth doing. Even the big ones. I was scared of the $50 price point on the Skarg's Tavern map that we're doing with the current Kickstarter. But for a map that big, drawn by Dyson, people jumped on it.
I wasn't worried about that one. I buy enough playmats on my own that I knew that was a fairly standard price for a playmat of that size.
I know you weren't worried. You were the one who talked me into it, but you were right.
Where I think the playmats, especially for the Fantasy Trip and Ogre, will really start to be fun is once we start creating adventures and scenarios around those playmats.
Yeah, Joe, you're right. $50 is dinner. On the other hand, you have to eat.
Turcom asks, was there ever a time when you thought of moving away from Austin?
Yes, but we never thought about it very long because this is where everybody is, and it's not a bad place outside of the summer weather, which is bad.
Though, as we get better at working from home, I would not be surprised if eventually, if we make this a standard, some of the staff do move out a bit to cheaper areas if they're not tied directly to Austin, because the Austin area just keeps getting more expensive.
Yes, and it's possible that we could move the warehouse and fulfillment operations, the physical warehouse 23, to a more central state in a less hostile business environment than Austin. Because Austin is expensive and building permits are difficult and hedged all around, and it's just stupid.
The Law 86 asks, what's the biggest opportunity you've missed out on with SJG? Game ideas that others ran with or business choices?
In other words, when did the caution bite us in the butt? Well, producing INWO a year sooner would have been a good thing. We probably would have gotten one more supplement out of it. I don't know, Phil?
Not tackling PDF just a little bit sooner. I know that was something, Steve, you had been trying to do for probably 3 or 4 years before it really happened.
Yes. The bottom line is I entrusted that project to the wrong people. We would be the leaders in PDF today if the first team that we put on the PDF library idea had been sufficiently productive. And that could have been huge. That was one where I was sure of the technology and I tried, but I did not make a good judgment in assigning the task, and that's just the way it goes.
Scott Contreras asks, any chance of INWO being re-released?
We have talked about it, but we haven't talked about it very hard. It would need some changes, enough that you might as well start over. A CCG is a big investment. And to be honest, right now, conspiracy theory is not as funny to me as it used to be, because we have something like 40% of the population really believing stupid stuff. I guess this is a time for another leak, and I don't have anything graphic to show, but I have turned into production, and we're about to announce a mini supplement for Illuminati just based on the year 2020. And it's bitter.
And someone points out that at FnordCon we did talk about the project being led by Derek Piercy for Illuminati Confirmed, which is similar to INWO.
Yes, Derek's Illuminati Confirmed is going to look a lot like INWO when that comes out. The last I heard, he was progressing well on that. He showed me some impressive graphic assets.
Nico P. asks, what's one GURPS book or setting you wish you'd been able to release but haven't been able to yet?
Well, I have two answers for that. One of them is GURPS Girl Genius, which is way overdue, but is finally progressing smoothly. The text and the page design have both been approved by Phil and Kaya Folio, and you may see it this year. If you don't, it'll be pretty early next year. The answer, now that I've done my plug, the answer to the question the way you meant it is GURPS Survivors, which was one I wanted to write myself, and it would have been a guide to the end of the world and what to do next, talking about various forms of apocalypse and the role-playing that you could do afterwards.
Don S. asks, how did you come up with the idea and design for Munchkin?
I wanted to do a game that was mocking in a fairly nice way, what the Brits call taking the piss out of bad D&D campaigns. I wanted to parody hack and slash role-playing. And that was the idea. And the design just sort of fell together.
Jody asks, what do you foresee as the future ratio of demand for physical products versus digital games?
A lot of it depends on how long it takes to get a vaccine. The longer it takes before we can get together again, the more we're all going to get used to dealing just with digital stuff. Contrariwise, the sooner we can get together again, the sooner we're going to be able to jump all over the physical.
Senestregius asks, have you considered going for a big popular license for a game and putting Gurps underneath it? Do you think this might bring more attention to Gurps?
We've considered it. We have negotiated a couple, and I shouldn't say I can't, but I will not name names on licenses that are in negotiation or that failed in negotiation. But if I could, I would have listed one of those as one of my regrets because I decided not to, and that was the wrong decision. Gurps is just too crunchy for the modern mass market. And if we had the Simpsons or Mickey Mouse license for it, to pick two that aren't at risk of happening, that still wouldn't be enough. I mean, we'd sell a lot of that book, but would we get a whole lot more people playing Gurps? Probably not. The market right now wants things that are faster and simpler. And we'll just have to wait till the wheel turns again. There are enough people who want exactly what Gurps is that it's worth our continuing to do support. But I don't think it would be worth investing in a Simpsons scale license.
Proteus asks, which new technologies do you see most influencing board and card games for design or manufacturing in the near future?
Certainly computer-aided design and manufacturing, not just 3D printing. 3D printing is just a subset of CAD-CAM. But the whole you build it on the computer is going to be important. The crowdfunding is both a social and a digital technology, but that's been big and it's not done changing. Phil, what else?
I would not say 3D printing is going to have any immediate impact. I actually looked at buying a 3D printer and said, this is not worth the time and hassle to even set up and learn how to use. And I suspect I'm closer to the average gamer in that way. As far as new technologies that could influence games, I think one of the most fascinating things I've watched is the way Fantasy Flight's been using the computers and printers that will allow you to basically randomize and customize output. The Discover game they created and the Keyforge game, where each game is essentially unique, couldn't have happened even 5 years ago. They just had to wait until that equipment was ready to go.
Well, game design skills and understanding are going to have to do some catching up with technology there.
Yeah. One thing I'm watching this year especially is the number of people who are using tabletop simulators to playtest new games. Now that they can't get together in person, they're using that more often to test ideas.
Yeah, that's an example of the street finding its own uses for technology, which I think is a William Gibson line. On the subject of 3D printers, you're right that they're not very good yet, but they're going to be good. And I will throw out a piece of advice for the people who think that that's an interesting idea, but aren't willing to spend money on the current crude ones. When you see a miniature or a miniatures line out there for sale as a file, if you really love it and it's cheap, buy it even if you can't do anything with it now, and make sure it's stored on good media, because one of these days you'll be able to use it. And the prices on those are going to go up, or the files will just disappear over time. I backed on Kickstarter recently an awesome project for little humanoid frog miniatures, and no 3D printer that I have access to is going to do justice to those, but that'll change someday. Yeah, gallium antinomide makes a good point. Resin printers are getting there.
All right, Sozin asks, do you think you would have survived without Munchkin?
I think we would have survived without Munchkin, but we would have been a lot smaller, and it would have been chancier. I don't know what I would have designed if I hadn't been busy doing Munchkin supplements. I guess that's the answer.
Alvar asks, what are the future plans for the Gurps line?
Gurps line will continue to emphasize PDFs because we can do more of those for a smaller investment. There will be the occasional book. We are not planning a new edition.
I think the recent Gurps Kickstarter campaign is a good example of the sort of thing we can experiment more with in the future for Gurps. That gave us the opportunity to reach more gamers faster than we typically do with a Gurps PDF release. So once we finish fulfilling that and can look at all the numbers, we may return to that idea and improve on it.
Polyphon asks, what keeps you motivated and excited to continue gaming? Many hobby careers bleed into becoming the job and lose their personal charm.
Fans? That's the answer.
Felix GenCon asks, do you have a vision for the next 40 years of SJ Games? I think we kind of touched on this earlier.
We did. I don't have a 40-year vision. Phil and I do well to have a 1-year vision.
So Zagros asks, how were you able to reclaim the copyright for the Fantasy Trip, Melee, and Wizard?
Simple operation of law. All you have to do is survive long enough and still have a copy of your original contract, and you can reclaim a copyright that you sold. If you're in a situation like that, talk to an intellectual property attorney. Now, I don't know if that really answered the question. Let's hold on a second before I take Felix's question. Zagros, if that didn't answer your question at all, if I misunderstood, just type into the stream, not as a QQ ask, a follow-up, and I'll see what I can do. And in the meantime, I'll take Felix's question. Are there any plans to reboot Illuminati? We just did. That's the second edition has been out for several months. Oh, Zagros wanted to know whether we had to try to contact Metagaming. We had to try, but we didn't have to succeed. If you send registered mail to the last address that can be found and it bounces, you have done what you had to do.
On Illuminati, not only did we do a new edition, there's a brand new expansion out right now. It just shipped within the last month or so, and it is also on offer on the Gen Con store and Warehouse 23 right now.
16 questions in the queue and 18 minutes left. We're doing okay.
So the next one up, what is a product that you felt never found the footing it deserved?
X-Bugs. I thought X-Bugs was an awesome game, but it turned out that there was no U.S. market for Tiddlywinks with special powers.
Cassandra asks, is there a one that got away, a license you never managed to find agreeable terms for?
I can think right offhand of 3 that got away, but not naming names.
Joe Webb asks, what were your feelings about the Gurps Traveler line?
Oh, I liked it. I really liked the Gurps Traveler. I'm a big Traveler fan. I love the universe. And frankly, I thought that we did a better job than anybody except the original GDW of presenting the old stories and telling new ones. It really helped to have Lauren around.
All right, Forrest asks, is there any update on Cthulhu Dice version 2.0?
I think it's at the printer. Phil?
Not quite yet at the printer, but getting close. Let me see.
We've already made the mold for the die. I know that.
Not only have we already made the mold for the die, I thought I had a photo of the 6 dice that go into the new edition. And yes, the thing about the new edition is not only did the die slightly change, but it's bigger than the old dice. The old ones were 25 millimeter and the new ones are 30 millimeter. And these are the 6 colors that go in the big Cthulhu Dice second edition box.
That was an advantage of doing more than a dozen different colors for the first set. We had examples in our hand of what's easiest to read and awesomest looking. I like the one at the top right. We called it the Blood and Bone die. You know, Phil, we really ought to do that color scheme as polyhedra.
That would be fun. I think we called the pink one pink.
Yeah. Pink. Yeah, green on purple, that was the basic Cthulhu colors. We liked that.
Cyrus asks, how do you rate the relative longevity of Gurps, Munchkin, Car Wars, Ogre, etc.?
Cyrus, if you will clarify that in text, do you mean which one has lasted longer or which do you think will last longer? Future longevity. Wow. I think Gurps will probably be supported at least in PDF indefinitely. I think Munchkin, at least the core game, may be around as long as people like tabletop games. Car Wars, ask me again after the new edition has been out for 6 months. Ogre, well, we may not always keep it in print, but people will be playing it for as long as there's interest in hex war games.
Larry Spoken Token asks, what are your feelings about the advent of big box stores in the US, diving deeper into the hobby board gaming world? How can we ensure this is healthy for the hobby overall?
Phil, that one's yours.
I think it's a great thing for the hobby overall. It's giving publishers a chance to introduce their games to a much larger audience and sell way more copies than they ever did before. You can walk into Target today and they have 2 different D&D box sets in there. And that hasn't been something you could say since probably 1983 or 1984. So if we want more gamers, we have to go to places and make new gamers. And the big box stores are a really good place to do that.
The only way in which big box can really hurt the hobby, in my opinion, and I think that's in our opinion, is if publishers allow them a big extra discount. I mean, if they're paying the same for their games as the hobby retailer and they choose to discount and undercut a little bit, that's just their business plan. But if we, the publishers, were to aid and abet that by giving, now I'm not picking on Target, but just using Target for an example, if we gave Target an extra 5%, that would be a way that we could really hurt the little brick and mortar stores. But we don't do that.
No, it's actually the opposite. We make more from Target sales than we do the hobby industry.
Okay, I see the question from Andreas there.
Yeah, Andreas asks, have the pandemic in the last 6 months affected how seriously you consider various digital options like virtual tabletops?
Yes, very much so. And I wish that I had seen even one virtual tabletop yet that I personally found easy to use. But it's the wave of the future.
Don S. asks, how long did it take you to design Munchkin?
Not long compared to some games. A month, give or take.
Scott Contreras Coterbay asks, what products by other companies in recent years have you liked?
Let's see. We could keep me going on this for a while, and we don't have all that much time in the world. But I told you about the little frog minis that I liked. That's just a recent crush that I had. But if you go back in my Twitter feed, you can find a link to them. I really like Terraforming Mars, and I wish that I could play it more. Phil introduced me to Century, and I totally recommend that, either in the 2-player mode or in the multiplayer mode. The last edition of Paranoia was awesome. The Schlock Mercenary role-playing game, which was called Planet Mercenary, was very good, had a lot of innovations in it. I could make a whole panel out of this, but I'm shutting up now. Phil, do you want to give me?
Everyone needs to go buy and play Hero Realms today. And that's all I have to say about that.
Turcom asks, I always get confused trying to understand the history of the old Battle Book games. Did SJ Games do Lost Worlds, or was that someone else?
Absolutely not. We did not do Lost Worlds.
The Lost Worlds Munchkin would be hilarious.
It would. Well, we could totally get the rights to Spike versus Flower if we wanted to.
I'm sure Al would be very behind that.
Yeah, if you like the idea, make a note. Wouldn't bother me.
Will do.
All right, Zagros asks, what do you think we can do to get more diversity in terms of gamers and developers to the hobby?
Welcome people of all sexes. I didn't say both, I said all sexes. People of all colors, people of all levels of ability to the table, both metaphorically and literally. Or to quote Wheaton's Law, don't be a dick.
I think something that we as publishers could be doing and should be exploring is donating our games to inner city schools and libraries. We try and reach out at times to different libraries, but usually it's the other way and the libraries reach out to us. And it would be wonderful if we could find a way to get our MIBs and our games into those locations.
Yeah, the place where it would do most good would probably be about middle school, and I'm afraid some of our titles might be scary, not to a middle schooler, but to the school board. You see where I'm going.
Yeah, we'd have to be very selective and run it past the schools, past the librarians, but we definitely have some titles that could work.
Let me say, by the way, that I am very proud of the Diana Jones Award this year.
What was the award for this year?
The award was in general for the quality of the games produced by people of color.
Oh, that's great. I hadn't looked yet to see who had won.
Yes.
Presto Jeff asks, is there any chance of crossover rules for Car Wars in the Ogre universe, etc.?
Not a high priority.
Sprinkles asks, with a shift to digital for the foreseeable future, is there a chance we get a digital Munchkin?
Don't make me cry.
Sprinkles apologizes. Proteus asks, is Gurps Girl Genius likely to see direct-to-market release, or is it going to be a Kickstarter?
Kickstarter.
Don S. asks, do you have any advice for new designers regarding design, rules, creating prototypes, etc.?
Let's see. That's another whole panel. One important one is playtest, 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 and blind test. Listen to your playtesters. One important one is don't go crazy with your prototype creation. It doesn't have to look as good as a real game, but don't totally neglect it either, because if a game is really going to be involving, it's probably going to use the graphics on the game elements as part of that involvement. And if you don't test them at some stage, you're releasing something that you don't get. That's a flaw in our Munchkin testing that we've never found a good way to solve. Our playtesters don't see the card art. Phil, got any to add?
I was going to stick with the don't put too much work into your first prototype line, because of the number of times we've encountered a design that the designer had put so much energy into the physical presentation that they were unwilling to even consider making changes to improve the game because it would affect the graphics.
Yeah, that's true enough.
Lord Dynell asks, any plans for bringing back Innomine?
You know, of all of our really awesome releases, that's probably the one that we have talked the least about bringing back. And it's not as though it was broken or that heaven had changed any. So no plans, but no opposition to it.
Blue Wizard asks, with Deadly Doodles being a game that can be played via video, as every person can have a tangible thing, even being distant, are there plans for additional boards and mechanics?
We just shipped Deadly Doodles 2 to stores that has 6 new boards and several new mechanics, including introducing a die to the system.
And some of those later maps are truly fiendish.
Oh, yeah. My high score on map 6 is -8.
All right, Granite Penguin asks, what's your preference for gaming materials, physical or PDF?
Yes.
Yeah, it depends on what it's for. I lean toward physical, but the convenience of PDF for references, as long as it's a searchable PDF, nothing compares to that. But a book I can bookmark in 4 places at once.
Gallium Antimony asks, any chance of an ogre movie or it appearing in other media?
We would be absolutely open to a good proposal on that, but if we have a good proposal right now, I'm not talking about it. No, we don't have a good proposal now.
All right, I closed the question queue a little while ago, so we've actually reached the end of it with about a minute and a half left on the panel. So, Steve and Phil, if you'd like to wrap things up, feel free.
I don't have any great wrapper except that they were great questions, and I have enjoyed the past hour.
Yeah, all I was going to say was thank you for showing up, and please remember that in 1 hour, we're back here again to talk Car Wars 6th Edition.
Yes. If you had a good time, give good feedback to Gen Con, because we'd like them to be excited about our doing this again. Oh, and here's something else to tell you if you're having a good time. We are going to do another FnordCon, a one-day event on October 10th. So save the date.
All right, thank you, everyone. That concludes our panel, and enjoy the rest of your Gen Con.
Thank you.